everyone, this is heyybritny and welcome back to my channel. As you guys can see, we do have a new background and we're also using a new mic, so hopefully everything sounds good as far as the quality. So just let me know if you guys have any opinions about all of that stuff. But in today's episode, we're going to be covering or reacting to these new South Park season 27. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Alrighty, so let's just get into some background information. So South Park recently signed a $1.5 billion deal with Paramount for 5 years. I believe they are going to release 50 episodes. And in their first episode, their premiere episode, they definitely went after Trump. And what we have kind of happening in the background, we know that Trump had filed a lawsuit against CBS over how they edited an interview with Kamala Harris, and Paramount did settle with Trump for $16 million. And basically that was around questions that she was asked and the answers that she gave. Also some helpful information, ABC also settled with Trump for $15 million, and this was around alleged defamation in regards to how they framed his civil case. So just kind of going back to South Park and Colbert and Paramount. So Colbert recently announced that his show is going to be canceled in 2026, I believe. And when he announced that, he heavily criticized Trump. And all of this was stemming from how Paramount and CBS settled with Trump over the lawsuit that he filed against them. Colbert just wanted to criticize Trump. I think he's been doing that, but anyways, he was probably more amped up as a result of everything happening with the lawsuit being settled and then also with his show being canceled. And there's been some back and forth around the framing of the cancellation. I believe a source that I read said that they were losing between 40 million to 50 million from his show, and then maybe I think he was saying it was closer to like 24 million or something like that. But we don't need to talk about the numbers in this particular episode because that's not our focus for today. But yeah, so that's the backstory. So they canceled Colbert's show, basically handed that over to South Park, and then South Park just came out with shots firing at Trump. So now let's just talk about South Park in general. So they tend to cover controversial topics and taboos, so they really go crazy. So if you've ever watched Degrassi and their tagline is, or the end's tagline is, "It goes there," South Park definitely goes there and beyond. So I do want to clarify that from some research that I've done, South Park has released 300 plus episodes, but only 6 have been banned and censored, so that tells you a little bit about the content that they create if you've never seen South Park before. Additionally, I want to clarify that I am not South Park's audience. I am not the type of person who is going to sit there for hours and hours and watch like a comedy type of TV show or movie or whatever, because I do like to binge watch, and so I'm not going to sit there for 2+ hours, 3 hours, 4 hours watching South Park episodes back to back to back and kind of find it funny the entire time. So I would probably get sick of their jokes after 5 minutes and not want to watch anymore. And also my sense of comedy is people saying funny stuff instead of doing funny stuff. So I think that that is important to have that information as you are listening to this episode or watching this video, because I do find stuff funny. I do have a sense of humor, but I just like it when it's said. I really like impersonations of people. That is something that really makes me laugh. And then just funny, witty comeback comics and all of that stuff, or puns. That's the type of humor that I am into. And so I just don't think that I would be able to watch South Park after one episode, because I did struggle a little bit with this episode just because I wanted to watch it and see what all of the hype and all of the feedback and all of the memes and the tweets were about. And it's a short episode, just 30 minutes, but I think I watched maybe the first 20 minutes, then had a buffering issue, and then it just never continued playing. And I finally went back to watch it this morning, and there was just like literally like maybe 2 or 5 minutes left of it. So it went by pretty quick, and I did find some stuff funny in that episode, but I just don't think that this is my cup of tea. So now getting into South Park and their controversial episodes or topics. So I remember hearing about South Park when I was growing up. So I'm 35, I would have been growing up in the early 2000s. And I definitely remember people talking about South Park and how it was kind of out there and extreme and all of that stuff. And it was adult comedy, if that makes sense. So it's not for younger kids, and if teenagers are watching it, their parents may or may not know that they're watching it. But anyway, the one episode that I kind of vaguely recall hearing about is the one on Tom Cruise and R. Kelly. And just to give you a quick rundown of the controversial topics that they've talked about, they talked about Tom Cruise and R. Kelly, as I've mentioned. They also talked about Muhammad the Prophet, and then there was an episode called Mr. Garrison's Fancy New Vagina, which is super interesting. But just going back to Tom Cruise and R. Kelly, so I know that Tom Cruise was really popular in the early 2000s as an actor, but then he really went viral because of him jumping on Oprah's couch, the Scientology aspect of it as well. And then R. Kelly's stuff was crazy because around that time he was coming out with Trapped in the Closet, and it is a 33-part series, album, whatever you want to call it. And basically he would release new parts of this whole Trapped in the Closet saga, and it would come out on the radio. And I remember on the way to school in the morning, my mom would turn on the radio if she heard that a new part was released or whatever, and we would listen to it and see what he was saying. And basically I believe every song kind of left you at a cliffhanger to figure out what he was going to say next, and it was just something crazy and outlandish and all of that stuff. And so that was definitely everywhere, so I can see why they did an episode on that. So I just wanted to go over some controversial moments. You can definitely do a Google search for like banned South Park moments, controversial South Park moments, and you'll be able to come up with different articles and list of things that they've talked about on South Park. So let's talk about some things that I found funny. So one scene that I want to talk about that I kind of found funny because I got the reference and I understood what they were talking about. So this was the whole scene where they had Jesus show up in school. PC principal called everybody to like the gym for like a lecture, an announcement, whatever, and then Jesus just showed up, and I don't even know the kid's name because I don't watch it that often. Basically, one of the kids went home and they were telling their parents about how Jesus showed up in school, and the dad was like, I don't think that's allowed. And this is referring to a 1962 court case where prayers were removed from the school, and basically that whole idea is that they are not promoting one religion over another and all of that stuff. And so Jesus showing up in school, it shouldn't be happening, basically, is the point of this scene. What I found funny about it, in addition to them talking about that moment, is that the dad's like, I don't think that should be happening, we need to talk to someone about this. And then when he does that, we think he's actually going to talk to someone, but he's just talking to ChatGPT. And I only know that it was ChatGPT because I would have just assumed that it was Siri. The caption said ChatGPT, so I think that it was just like a verbal readout of what he would have been typing into ChatGPT. So I found that kind of funny because obviously if you're really concerned about this, you may consult with ChatGPT to figure out like what your next steps are, but you would actually go to like the school or a government official and kind of try to figure out how to navigate this so that you guys are going forward in the right direction if this is something that's truly concerning for you. Then next what came up was the whole thing about woke being dead. And woke really means that you kind of like fight for the underdog, or you're kind of exposing things that people aren't privy to. And I think woke has kind of become something else because originally it used to be referring to like the injustices against Black people, and it's kind of morphed into something else beyond African Americans and the Black community. And so when one of the kids was like, hey, woke is dead, and he's like freaking out about this, and he's talking about how you can say slurs and all of that stuff, nothing is kind of frowned upon anymore. There's no cancel culture, basically. So everything is kind of not normal in a sense, but if you are living in a woke world and then all of a sudden all of that is gone, things are going to be very different, right? Then that kid, whatever his name is, for whatever reason, he's like really freaking out about this, and we see him like in this car scene, and basically he's trying to off himself or delete himself, and that's just really crazy to see it actually depicted on screen, because if you're a teenager watching that, you're gonna be like, what is he doing? How is he doing it? And it's just too much information in that one scene, in my opinion. So I didn't really like that too much. And then I didn't really understand like the whole purpose of it. And one thing I'll say is, even though this is a comedy and it's supposed to be funny, it's supposed to draw your attention to certain issues, I really think that they should have if they had this scene, and I don't know if they'll continue it in like future episodes or whatever, but with the kids doing all that stuff in the car, was trying to delete themselves and really not knowing what they're doing fully, they should have a scene where the parents are talking to the kids about what they're doing and like, hey, if you need help, these are resources, that type of conversation. That is what would normally happen in like a normal TV show, like a teenage drama or whatever. They would have those disclaimers about, hey, you know, if you need mental health, call this number, blah, blah, blah. They would have information on the screen to address what they just talked about or what you just saw as a viewer. They wouldn't just let that slide under the radar, in my opinion. So I didn't really like that moment, but I can see the big picture of what they're trying to do and what their focus is. They're trying to draw attention to certain issues. Now let's move on to Trump. So they heavily depicted Trump in this episode, and one thing that I found funny was when they imitated basically Trump's response to everything, which is, hey, I'm suing you, blah, 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 because he sues everyone. So that's funny, that's understandable, but I did not get why they used the actual picture of Trump instead of making him another animated cartoon character. So that was weird to me. I don't really know what South Park's strategy is, how they usually go about doing their episodes and all of that, because from what I could see, there was only one other person from the articles that I was looking at who had a face like Trump. I can't recall who that person was. I know that they talked about Saddam Hussein was one of the people who had, like, I guess his actual face instead of an animated character. So I didn't really get the whole significance of that, but I would have preferred if they used a animated version of Trump. And then I also didn't think that the guy sounded anything like Trump. So I really like impersonations, which I just said at the beginning of this episode. I like it when people imitate how Trump talks, his mannerisms, how he moves his hands and all of that stuff. And so I didn't find how they were displaying Trump to be funny in that sense, because it wasn't anything other than like, hey, I'm suing everybody. It was more just the fact of him suing everybody, not the way he said it or anything like that. But I did find it funny, but they used Trump's different facial expressions when they had his face up there, so that was funny. Moving on, we have Trump in bed with Satan, and obviously you can think whatever you want about that. To me, the Satan guy, obviously he's red, he's the devil, he's bad, but he just made me think of the genie in Aladdin for whatever reason. And then obviously they hyper feminized him because he was like pouting and whining and complaining, which is really interesting. Anyway, I wonder if that's what they were intending to do with that, like to say that women are the devil because they feminized the devil. I don't know, but I don't have an issue with them doing that. But I did think that they went a little bit too far with constantly talking about Trump's anatomy and his private parts and the size of it and all of that stuff, and I don't think he needed to be naked on camera or on screen for us to understand what they were saying. It's enough that you have him in bed with Satan. Literally, you could have put him in pajamas, something less provocative. So yeah, that's just my opinion on that. And then also, I saw people talking about this on Twitter, but I didn't get the reference. Satan talked about how Satan in South Park talked about how his last partner was not as bad, I guess, as Trump. And I couldn't figure out who they were talking about, but people on Twitter are saying, oh, obviously he's talking about Hitler. And so I think that that's a stretch, because it's not a stretch, it's not something that I would have easily been able to connect the dots to. And so that's why I think it can go a little bit over people's heads if the dots aren't crystal clear, or if they aren't talking about things that generally everyone should know and be able to easily get the reference to, because that's what makes it funny. If you're making jokes about something that people don't know a whole lot about or people are not exposed to, it's going to be very hard for people to understand your content and then also find it funny. So that was interesting as well. And then the other thing at the end was the whole pro-Trump messaging. So they had Jesus come and give a sermon on the hill. So obviously this is representing a biblical moment, but then basically Jesus is just telling the people, the South Park people, hey, just go along, he's gonna sue you. So basically it looks like he's given one type of sermon, but he's actually given a different type of sermon and warning to the people of South Park. And then obviously we know that Trump was going to sue the people at South Park because of them, I guess, rebelling against him, going against him, whatever. And so I think they said 1 billion or 5 billion. I'm not 100% sure. Billions and billions. I like the way he says billions with his B's. Billions, billions and billions, whatever. Anyway, so he's gonna sue them for like 5 billion. They have somebody on the phone with Trump and they get it down to 3 million. They're happy because this is a lot less money, whatever. Kind of stupid because you still owe 3 million, but whatever. And so then they talk about, hey, you know, we need to do pro-Trump messaging. And it cuts to this really weird, bizarre scene of Trump in a full suit in the desert. When I first saw him on screen in that image, it made me think of Detective Gordon from Law and Order Criminal Intent. And he's the guy who plays the villain in Echo, and they made him massively seem so much bigger for some reason, like it was his shoulders and all of that stuff. And I don't know if he's actually that big in real life, but when I saw Trump in this moment, that's what it made me think of. And then they just have him strip out of his clothes, and so he's just like running through the desert or walking through the desert naked. He passes out, his privates talk to him, and then he gets back up. So I didn't really understand the whole point of that. I thought that was really kind of extreme. They could have made the point with more clothes on or whatever. But again, they can talk about whatever they want. But I did think that this brings up an interesting conversation around deepfakes, because I know that has been a thing. We've seen a few YouTubers talk about how they've had deepfakes of them in compromising positions, and it's not actually them, it's just their head on an image doing crazy stuff, and they've been really distressed about all of that. And so I can't imagine how I would feel if this was me in that situation. I think the jokes are funny, but like the deepfakes, just because that can happen to anybody and everybody, I don't know if that is a bridge too far, just the whole stuff around deepfakes, because that can really do harm to somebody's reputation, even if it's not them actually doing this stuff. Just the idea that they could have been doing that stuff just because you had that in your head, I think that causes some kind of gray area that we haven't really been able to talk about, because we don't know a whole lot about this, because this is a new technology. They've probably been doing it for years, but I think now it's a little bit more obvious to where people are waking up and understanding what this is happening, and having to be able to tell the difference between something that's actually real versus something that's a deep fake and it's not real. Just to go back to all of this deep fake stuff, so my sister and I did watch a show called The Capture, and this was exactly on the topic of deep fake. So basically this took place in, I think, the UK, and there was this I'm not gonna have the terms correct because they use different terms for their political structure, but basically like the prime minister, he would actually go to an interview, but people hijacked the interview and basically had him deep faked on the camera saying something completely different from what he was actually saying in the studio, and nobody understood that he was saying one thing in the room, but a different thing was being broadcast to all the people who are watching. And so that is very dangerous, because yes, he can come out and say, hey, is it me? But he actually has to defend himself against whatever people would have seen on screen. And so yeah, so this is a whole gray area that I don't think people really understand. Is a lot more complicated than just being used as a punchline in a comedy show. Alrighty, so that covers everything that I want to talk about in this episode. Again, I'm not a huge fan of South Park. It's not something that I would normally watch. I'm not the audience for it, but I am big on comedy. I think that you should be able to tell jokes, and obviously with some of South Park's episodes being banned, that does indicate that there is a line on when you are going too far with comedy. So what are your thoughts on this? Let me know in the comment section below. Do you think that all comedy is okay? Is there comedy that should be banned? What are your thoughts about this episode specifically? What do you think is going to happen going forward? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.